Hey everybody, my name is Adrienne, and today we're going to be talking about aperture, ISO, frame rate, and shutter speed, and how all four of those things interact with each other and also how they impact each other. These are really important for you to get a good grasp on for recording your own video content. I did just do 4 short videos on each of these topics. So if you're interested, you can click over to the shorts here on YouTube and watch those. And then I'll also have the reels from Instagram linked down below in the description box. Let's compare all of these things to this little wooden Jeep. Whenever my husband Nick goes to Lowe's, they give him one of these little free kits that you can take home and build it with your kid. My older son loves them. He is very proud. They built this one together recently, so I thought I'd share it. But okay, sorry, tangent. All right, camera. Aperture, ISO, frame rate, shutter speed. Let's call the steering wheel the aperture. It controls where you go, and you can't do anything else with just this piece of the Jeep. Now you've got the brakes. Let's pretend we can see a little brake pedal there on the driver's side floor and call them the ISO brakes. We're getting better. We can steer and we can stop, but we can't go, so we need frame rate wheels. That is hard for me to say. And finally, the engine can be the shutter speed. All 4 of these things have been designed to work together, and it gives me a great experience. I can take a great road trip with all of them. Now, admittedly, I have a very tenuous grasp on how cars actually work, like in detail. But that Jeep analogy was supposed to help those of you who may not totally understand that aperture, ISO, frame rate, and shutter speed all work together. They're all interconnected. So it's really important for you to use each one of them properly so that they're able to work together in harmony. The 4 concepts, they're just really critical for you to be able to make great looking videos and to really be fully proficient in using your camera. I want to start by talking about frame rate. Frame rate refers to how quickly you are either capturing or playing back a sequence of still images. The standard frame rate for movies is 24 frames per second. So that means that in those movies, there are 24 frames within 1 second. And that frame rate allows for a little bit of something called motion blur. Let's say you're watching a movie about basketball. 24 frames per second is going to give that ball a little bit of motion blur. So your eye doesn't see that perfectly, but enough stuff in the shot is going to be crisp and clear enough that your brain is able to make sense of what's going on. Now you may be wondering, when could I not use 24 frames per second? Well, that depends on what you're recording and the effects you want to create. So let's say you're making that basketball movie, but you want the motion to be more clear. Use a faster frame rate. That'll make that ball moving around the court more crisp and more clear. But you really don't want to go above like 120 frames per second because you're going to have to get like a nicer, more expensive camera in order to make your footage look more natural. Okay, I have heard people use frame rate and shutter speed interchangeably when they're talking about video, and it is really important to know that they are not the same thing. Shutter speed measures how long the shutter is open inside the camera. It's one of the things that controls how much light enters the camera, hits the sensor, and it's usually for fractions of a second. The faster your shutter speed, the less light is allowed in. Whereas the slower your shutter speed, the longer it's open, and so more light is allowed in your camera. The rule to follow is that in order to get realistic motion that our human eye is used to seeing, you need to set your shutter speed to double your frame rate. All right, aperture. Aperture is the hole in the diaphragm in your camera, and it also controls how much light enters your camera and hits the sensor. The size of your aperture is measured in something called f-stops. So my f-stop is a 4. It's an f4, so it's pretty wide open. So it's letting a lot of light in to hit the sensor in the camera, and it's giving me this really nice bright image. But that low f-stop is also impacting what's going on in the background. Do I look a little bit blurry? That's called depth of field. This shot has a relatively shallow depth of field, so that means that I am in focus, but my background is out of focus. Making your background a little bit blurry is a way to get your viewers to focus on you. Your background is there, it looks nice, but it's not pulling attention. Now, you can see in this photo that I took in Alaska, everything is in focus. The entire landscape is crisp, clear, and sharp. If you want your viewers to be able to see everything, then you need to use a higher f-stop, like f11 or f22. That will make sure that you're really capturing all of the details. And finally, ISO. If anybody out there is interested in film, ISO is the digital way of talking about ASA. ASA describes how sensitive a particular roll of film will be to light, and ISO describes how sensitive your camera sensor will be to light. A high ISO is going to be more sensitive to light, so you're going to use that setting somewhere like indoors or at night. Then a low ISO is the opposite, so you'll use a lower setting if you're filming outside, middle of the day, full bright sun. Okay, let's set the scene. You're recording inside. Your frame rate is set to 24 frames per second, which means that your shutter speed should be set to 50. You've decided to have a low aperture because you're hoping that your lamp here in the background might be a little bit blurry. And your ISO is set to 500. It's a pretty bright room, you know, there's a lot of white, but you're still inside. But things just look too dark. So you decide to crank up your ISO. And voila, it brightens up the shot. But with each ISO setting, the image gets a little bit worse. It gets more grainy or noisy, there's less contrast and less dynamic range. Personally, I try to keep my ISO settings in between 400 and 800 because that way I just always know that I'm getting the highest possible quality image for the environment that I'm in. The big thing that I want you to take away from all of this is how interconnected these four concepts are. They all control light and they all control the quality of the image, among many other things. The more you use these settings, the more you practice with them, the more confidence you are going to have in your own production. Eventually, you'll be able to look at your own footage and really assess it. You can look at it and you could think, oh, maybe I'll open up the aperture a little bit more next time, or maybe I could bump down the ISO a little bit next time, and really dial in that image to make it look exactly how I want it to. Well, that's it from me. Leave a comment below if you'd like me to dive into more camera basics. And if you'd like to see more, I hope you'll subscribe. Thanks for watching.